Welcome to the debate. So, for decades, there was this golden rule of Middle Eastern geopolitics.
Right. The unwritten rule.
Exactly. And it was incredibly simple. Whatever you do, whatever happens, do not spark a direct, overt war with Iran. Keep it in the shadows, keep it localized, but never, ever hit the core.
Yeah, the shadow war. Just keep it quiet.
Keep it quiet. But 6 weeks ago, we threw that rulebook entirely out the window. Since the initiation of direct United States and Israeli strikes on Iranian soil, we have just been living in a completely different geopolitical reality.
We really have.
Right now, if you are listening to this on your commute, you are already feeling it. We are seeing Iranian retaliation across the entire region, severe global oil shocks, and, a fragile, heavily brokered ceasefire that, it looks like it is collapsing before the ink is even dry.
Well, we did throw the rule book out, yeah. But I think the real question is whether we actually had a new strategy to replace it with, or if we just, decided to set the old rules on fire and hope for the best.
And that really gets to the absolute core of our discussion today. We are looking at a fundamentally divergent understanding of what these last 6 weeks actually mean.
Right.
So the central question we have to grapple with is this. Is this escalating conflict an absolutely necessary measure to stop a steadily advancing threat, or is it a catastrophic strategic disaster?
That is the dividing line, for sure.
Right. So looking at the historical record, my position is that confronting Iran directly right now is a necessary exercise in what I call delayed realism. It's a long overdue step to finally neutralize decades of proxy warfare and an advancing nuclear ambition.
And, I look at that exact same reality and see a textbook offensive miscalculation. From my perspective, this conflict is a case of massive strategic overreach, one that risks unprecedented global economic and geopolitical fallout without any coherent endgame.
Let's get right into the foundation of this idea of delayed realism then, because to understand where we are at week 6 of this conflict, we absolutely cannot pretend the clock just started ticking 6 weeks ago.
No, of course not. The history is long.
It is. The United States and its allies have been at war with Iran for decades. We just haven't always had the political courage to admit it. Look at the historical evidence. This began with the embassy hostage crisis in 1979. It evolved into the systematic funding and training of Hezbollah in the 1980s. It metastasized into sophisticated proxy operations in Iraq and Syria. And hovering above all of this has been their steadily advancing nuclear program. The centrifuges have just kept spinning.
They have, but...
So when I say delayed realism, I mean that at a certain point, a superpower faces a binary choice. You either confront the reality that containment has failed, or you surrender to it. Waiting, appeasing, hoping for some magical regime change from within, it only allows the nuclear threat to worsen. We are finally ripping the Band-Aid off.
See, I come at it from a different way, because dealing with reality means acknowledging the mechanical limits of military power.
Okay. What limits?
The large-scale strikes we have seen over these past 6 weeks, the targeted elimination of leadership and the systematic destruction of domestic infrastructure, that represents strategic overreach in its purest form.
I completely disagree with the word overreach.
But think about the scale. You do not initiate that level of kinetic action, direct, explosive strikes against a sovereign, heavily armed nation of 88 million people unless you are fully prepared for total region-wide escalation.
Which we are capable of handling.
But looking at the panicked scrambling in Washington right now to maintain this fragile ceasefire, we clearly weren't prepared for it. You call it ripping the Band-Aid off, I call it amputating a limb without knowing how to tie a tourniquet.
But if the limb is gangrenous, to borrow your analogy, you still have to cut it off. You don't have a choice.
Let me offer a counterintuitive reality about this perceived nuclear emergency then. Because the assumption that a nuclear Iran automatically equals a wildly unstable Middle East actually ignores decades of established deterrence theory.
Wait.
While it sounds terrifying on its face, historically, nuclear advancement often makes deterrence more stable.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of what you're saying here. Are you actually arguing that giving a state sponsor of terrorism a nuclear weapon makes us safer?
I know.
Walk me through how that actually plays out, because to anyone listening, that sounds completely backwards.
I know it sounds backwards, but look at the game theory of mutually assured destruction, right, Matt? When two competing powers both possess nuclear weapons, they rarely, if ever, go to direct war with one another.
In a conventional Cold War setting, sure.
Because the cost of miscalculation isn't just losing a battle, it's total annihilation. It forces states to be hyper-rational. So, by trying to forcibly dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure from the air, we haven't made the region safer.
We've removed the threat.
No, we have removed the paralyzing fear of mutually assured destruction and replaced it with a very active, very deadly conventional regional war.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on why that game theory falls apart here. Mutually assured destruction only works when both sides operate within a traditional state-based framework, where the primary goal is self-preservation.
Iran wants to preserve itself. The regime wants to survive.
Yes, but Iran's primary mechanism of power projection isn't traditional statecraft. It is a vast, decentralized network of unaccountable terror proxies. A nuclear umbrella doesn't stabilize that dynamic. It acts as a shield that emboldens it.
Emboldens them to do what exactly?
It allows Tehran to act with total impunity through Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen, knowing we will be completely paralyzed to strike back because of the nuclear threat. We couldn't afford to let them finalize that shield.
But this brings us exactly to the practical application of force. You say we couldn't afford to let them finalize the shield. Fine. But the real test of this campaign is whether the objectives can actually be achieved.
And I argue they can be.
We have to define what winning actually looks like. Because right now, looking at the Pentagon briefings, the definition seems to change depending on the day.
I think the definition is incredibly clear, actually. Neutralize the nuclear program, dismantle the terror networks, and cripple the regime's power projection.
Yes, but how? We are relying almost entirely on air power. Let's look at the mechanics of an air campaign. Air power is exceptionally good at breaking things. I'll grant you that.
It is.
It can degrade a power grid, it can disrupt supply chains, it can crater a runway, but air power cannot govern. It cannot determine who rules a country.
We aren't trying to govern Iran.
But the idea that we are going to fundamentally remake the Iranian security apparatus from the air is a fantasy that ignores every lesson of the last 20 years of modern warfare. If you systematically destroy the regime's infrastructure and command networks, you inherently create a power vacuum.
Right.
And then what? We are staring down the barrel of an Iraq 2.0 scenario. You break the state, and you are left holding the pieces of a fractured, heavily armed sectarian war zone.
Look, I hear the Iraq 2.0 comparison a lot, but I think it misses a massive variable. The Iraq 2.0 specter is a convenient rationalization for paralysis.
How is it a rationalization? It's exactly what happens when you topple a Middle Eastern government.
Because it assumes our goal is regime change, occupation, and nation building. No credible strategist is suggesting we occupy Tehran.
But if you destroy the people in charge, you get a collapse anyway. You don't have to intend to nation build to accidentally break a nation.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame the structure of their power differently. Think of Iran's proxy network less like a traditional standing army and more like a massive illicit venture capital firm.
Okay, a venture capital firm.
Yeah.
Tehran is the central bank, Hezbollah, Hamas, the militias in Iraq. These are the subsidiary startups. They rely on the parent company for funding, advanced munitions, and intelligence logistics.
Right. They get their seed money from the IRGC?
Exactly. So if you use air power to blow up the parent company's bank accounts, command centers, and weapons manufacturing facilities, you don't need to occupy the subsidiaries. They simply go bankrupt. Victory here isn't about invading. It is surgically cutting off the logistical head of this venture capital firm.
That venture capital analogy is clever, but it assumes the subsidiaries just quietly fold up shop when the parent company takes a hit.
They lose their funding. In reality, decentralized networks are incredibly resilient. They just go underground, resort to asymmetrical tactics, and bleed you out over a decade. But let's step back from the mechanics of the proxies for a second and look at the immediate global fallout we are dealing with right now today.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Because if you're listening to this and you've looked at your retirement portfolio or filled up your gas tank this morning, you know this isn't just a theoretical debate happening in a war room.
Absolutely. The global economic costs are real and they are painful.
They are devastating. 6 weeks in, we are seeing non-speculative economic damage. The oil shocks are massive. The Strait of Hormuz, which, by the way, sees about a fifth of the world's daily oil consumption pass through its incredibly narrow waters, is experiencing unprecedented instability.
Yes, shipping has been severely disrupted.
Global shipping rates have skyrocketed because vessels are rerouting thousands of miles. But frankly, the economic shock, as bad as it is actually secondary to the true strategic disaster here.
Which you believe is what exactly?
The depletion of our absolute most critical military assets.
The asset argument.
It's crucial. The United States is currently burning through its most advanced, finite resources to swat down cheap Iranian drones and missiles. We are expending precision-guided munitions like the SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors.
To protect Allied airspace.
Yes, but these cost millions of dollars each, and more importantly, they take years to manufacture. We are wearing down carrier strike groups. These are the exact assets we desperately need to maintain a credible deterrent posture against China in the Indo-Pacific.
I see where you're going with this.
By locking ourselves into this Middle Eastern conflict, burning our high-end munitions to defend airspace, we are effectively handing Beijing a strategic victory without them firing a single shot. This war is actively weakening America's global position.
Well, I'm going to push back on that prioritization with a very direct question. Is it not a profound failure of deterrence to meticulously conserve our military assets for a theoretical future conflict with China, while simultaneously allowing Iran to aggressively dominate the Middle East today?
It's not a failure of deterrence, it's asset management. You can't fight a two-front war if you run out of missiles.
But what good is a deterrent if you refuse to use it when an adversary actively targets your interests? I mean, a deterrent only works if the enemy believes you have the political will to actually pull the trigger.
We are pulling the trigger, though. We're just shooting at the wrong targets.
No, if Xi Jinping watches the United States retreat from the Middle East, if he sees us allow a global maritime choke point to be closed because we are afraid of expending our interceptor missiles, do you honestly think that makes him more cautious regarding Taiwan?
It makes him realize we aren't distracted?
Or does it embolden him? He will conclude that American resolve is incredibly brittle. A true global superpower must possess the capacity to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, there is economic pain right now, but global energy markets are incredibly resilient.
Tell that to the consumers.
They are feeling it, I know, but markets will eventually restabilize as supply chains reroute, as they always do. But a nuclear-armed hegemonic Middle East under Iranian influence, that will never stabilize.
See, you are assuming this current violence is going to plateau and eventually stabilize. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
The mechanics of escalation are not nearly as controllable as strike planners in Washington like to believe. You talk about walking and chewing gum, but we are significantly closer to a devastating regional war that pulls in U.S. ground troops than this current fragile ceasefire suggests.
I completely disagree that ground troops are an inevitable outcome. We have a massive technological overmatch. We don't need boots on the ground.
Technological overmatch doesn't stop asymmetrical escalation, though. Iran is not just absorbing these blows, they are actively retaliating.
With low-end drones,
Yes, but they are targeting Gulf state desalination plants and oil infrastructure. They're using cheap, low-tech drone swarms that overwhelm million-dollar radar systems. And internally, the human cost of this air campaign is creating a highly dangerous shift in their domestic politics.
look, the human cost is undeniably tragic. No serious person celebrates the loss of civilian life.
It is tragic, but it is also a strategic variable that you have to account for. If you look at the intelligence reports coming out of Iran over the last 6 weeks, public sentiment is shifting dramatically.
In what way?
There was a time, quite recently, when large segments of the Iranian population openly protested the regime and hoped for external pressure to weaken the Ayatollahs. Now, facing the reality of civilian casualties, blackouts, and the destruction of their national infrastructure, that hope is turning into exhaustion and deep anger directed outward at us.
The rally around the flag effect.
Exactly.
Historically, large-scale bombing campaigns almost always strengthen a targeted regime's grip on power. It creates a rally around the flag effect. By pursuing this aggressive campaign, you are actively cementing the very regime you claim needs to be weakened, because you are giving them the ultimate external scapegoat.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it fundamentally misreads the psychology of the regime's leadership. You're applying Western political logic to a radical theocracy.
How is a population's anger Western logic? It's human nature. Because Iran doesn't escalate because they are pushed into a corner by our aggression or because of public opinion. They escalate specifically because they sense hesitation. They probe for soft tissue. They push the boundaries when they perceive a lack of genuine resolve from the West.
So your solution is just to hit them harder?
My solution is to stop sending mixed signals. When we hit them and then immediately signal through back channels that we want to de-escalate and sign a ceasefire, they read that as weakness, and they fire back. The only way to stop the cycle of endless escalation is to establish absolute overwhelming force.
And what does absolute force practically look like to you?
It means moving beyond just targeted retaliatory strikes and establishing total maritime dominance. We have to enforce a reality where they understand without any ambiguity that further escalation means the total destruction of their economy.
A blockade?
Yes. That means utilizing electronic warfare to blind their coastal radars. It means enforcing a strict naval quarantine so they cannot export a single drop of oil or import a single microchip for their drones.
And the civilians?
Missile silos under civilian infrastructure and fund terror proxies instead of feeding its people.
That is exactly the logic of endless escalation. The idea that, just a little more force, just a little more maritime dominance, and then they'll finally back down. That is precisely how great powers sleepwalk into absolute disasters.
It's the only way to establish deterrence.
Every single side in every major conflict always believes that the next application of overwhelming force will be the final one. It never is. The adversary always has a vote.
Of course they do.
If you enforce a total naval quarantine and push their economy to the absolute brink of collapse, they will not quietly surrender. They will use every asymmetrical tool at their disposal. Sea mines in the shipping lanes, cyber attacks on global banking infrastructure, activating sleeper cells. They'll do whatever it takes to burn the region down with them.
So we arrive at the precipice of our discussion, looking down at two deeply divergent paths. 6 weeks into this conflict, the choices moving forward couldn't be more stark.
No, they really couldn't.
From my perspective, the only viable long-term path is to escalate strategically. We cannot afford the illusion of a negotiated half measure that just kicks the can down the road. We must cripple their military infrastructure and enforce absolute maritime dominance until the regime unequivocally backs down. To me, it is the only mechanical way to prevent the permanent nightmare of a nuclear Middle East.
And my summary is that we must recognize the limits of our own power and de-escalate immediately. We need to push for a negotiated settlement, even an imperfect, deeply frustrating one.
Which it would be.
Highly frustrating. But the alternative is sleepwalking into a long, unwinnable war of attrition that structurally drains our strategic resources, hands geopolitical advantages to true rivals like China, and guarantees a massive global economic shock. The costs of trying to remake this reality by force simply outweigh the achievable benefits.
Yet, despite our profound disagreement on the remedy, I think we both clearly see the immense severity of the diagnosis. This 6-week mark is not just another chapter in a long rivalry, it is a critical inflection point in modern history.
I couldn't agree more on that.
This fragile ceasefire, the widespread regional retaliation, the shifting economic indicators, they are actively reshaping the global order in real time. The stakes, spanning from the stability of global energy markets to the irreplaceable value of civilian lives, are truly monumental.
We absolutely agree on the stakes, and I think there is immense value in examining this crisis through these two distinct lenses. One lens looks back at historical responsibility, the failure of containment, and the perceived necessity of confrontation.
Right.
And the other lens looks forward at strict strategic limits, global asset management, and the terrifying, uncontrollable mechanics of escalation. Understanding the complexity of modern deterrence requires holding both of these realities up to the light. There is so much more to explore regarding how global superpowers manage multiple threat vectors simultaneously, and the underlying material provides a wealth of data on those precise mechanics.
It really does. It leaves us to weigh a choice that leaders in Washington and allied capitals are agonizing over as we speak. Do you finish the fight decisively, accepting the tremendous, immediate costs to secure the future? Or do you end the fight before it spreads further, accepting the ongoing presence of a dangerous adversary in order to preserve global stability today? The pressure is immense, and the choices we make in the coming weeks will define the next century of geopolitics. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.